Hey, girlfriends, welcome to another episode of Girlfriends and Goals. We're your hosts, Miosha.
And Samaria.
This podcast is a space where we'll talk about friendships, life goals, a little bit of pop culture, and all things womanhood.
On today's episode, we're inspired by something that we saw on Twitter. And so the topic of discussion is, does a bad partner equal a bad parent? So we definitely have a good episode in store for you guys. If you are watching this on YouTube, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and writing us a review. All right. So I'm going to start off with the tweet that I saw on Twitter and get your reaction to it.
All right.
So someone tweeted and said, people be great dads and terrible partners. And then a lady responded, the idea that you can be a terrible partner and a great parent is a lie. Good luck to everyone involved, though. So it's the ending for me. So I want to get your thoughts on that. Is the idea that someone can be a terrible partner but a good parent a lie?
I think that in some instances it is true
Okay.
that if you're a terrible partner, you're probably not being the best parent. I
Hmm.
can't speak for every situation where sometimes it could just be a rocky relationship, difference of opinion, or it just doesn't work out, you grow apart. But I do think if you are actively doing something to cause trauma, or I don't even know, just it's a situation where the emotional and maybe mental, physical well being of the other parent is
Hmm.
at risk or not in a good place because of your behavior.
Okay.
I do think that you could start to push yourself in a situation where you're not being the best parent because the other parent also is interacting with the child, and your behavior, what you're doing or not doing, could impact how they're showing up in parenthood, which then impacts the child.
That's really interesting how you broke it down. So my first instinct is maybe most of the time yes, but not like 60-40, maybe like 55-45. So
When you
like
say most of the time, yes, what do you mean?
most of the time, someone who's a terrible partner, I do think that that probably does reflect on their parenting.
Okay.
So 55% of the time, but I'm holding out hope that there's 45%, of people who don't allow it to impact it. So I think there are several exceptions to that. I don't think we can objectively say that's a lie, period.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more nuance to it. So I get where she's coming from, and I'm glad that she made that statement because hopefully it caused people to reflect on it. But
Mm-hmm.
I do think there are exceptions to that situation.
Yeah, I think I'm not in her head, but
Mhm.
if I were to guess what caused her to make that statement is I have heard where people are in relationships or situations with their significant other and
Mhm.
things aren't going well, or they may be being perceived as not being the best person because of how they're conducting themselves in the relationship.
Yeah.
And the response is, oh, but I take care of my kids, or, oh, well, I'm a good parent. Still, you can't take that away from me, even though
Hmm.
their behavior could be extremely bad in the
Yeah,
relationship.
absolutely. I 100% agree with that. So, of course, like the way that Twitter works, I couldn't just read that and keep on scrolling. So, I went to see what exactly are the responses. Are people agreeing with this, disagreeing with it, and why? And
Mhm.
so, I'm going to start with the people who disagreed and get your opinions on what they said. So,
Well, before you do that,
yeah.
I'm curious of what you saw overall. Would you say that most people agreed or disagreed? Was she being
Mm.
dragged for what she said? Was it
No, she
obvious?
she definitely wasn't being dragged. There was
Okay.
enough like consensus around what she said that she was definitely not being dragged. And there were even people who were like, the people who don't agree with you need to agree with you. Like essentially, that's putting it nicely. But yeah, they're crazy for thinking that those two things can be separate.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I would
Okay.
say more people agreed with it than not, but you definitely did see enough people disagreeing that there were conversations happening in the thread.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll read two of these so you can react to either one of them. So this one comes from a gentleman who says, terrible is subjective. I've seen people get left for being boring partners, but they're great dads, for being cheaters, but they're great dads. It's subjective on what terrible means. So keep
Hmm.
that in mind. Keep your thoughts on it. I'm going to read the second one. So someone says, I'm pretty sure there are well-functioning co-parenting families that clearly show it is possible. Perhaps a terrible partner is not the best terminology, but rather a terrible partner specifically for the child's mother. Everybody has different needs.
Hmm.
This one
Okay.
came from a lady.
Okay.
So, which are you leaning towards one of those, people and what they said or another and why? What are your thoughts on that?
So I'll start with the first one
Mhm.
where the guy says terrible is subjective. I agree to a certain point, but I
Okay.
don't want to gaslight people as well. Because it's like sometimes if there is just bad behavior and then people start to get in the nitty gritty, like, well, is it that bad? Because it's not the worst of situations.
All
I'm
right.
like, okay, let's not gaslight people on clearly bad behavior. But
Mhm.
I do agree that it could be subjective. He mentioned cheaters, and he's right. For some people, they're able to find a way to move past cheating or infidelity. But for other people, that could be very traumatizing. And
Hmm.
so it is subjective, I guess, depending on the people involved.
Okay.
Yeah. And then for the second one, or do you want to respond to that?
I think I want to respond. So I think I agreed with this guy
Hmm.
on like terrible is subjective because I do think in a lot of situations terrible is subjective. Uh, there are some other situations which we'll probably talk about in a second here, but there are some other situations that I think are objectively terrible. But in a lot of ways, the other woman said something that I think speaks to me in
Hmm.
that they could just be a terrible person. Like the two parents could just be a bad match, like a terrible match, but they've decided to have children together. And now, unfortunately, the children are left with that situation. I do think that is a possible scenario
Hmm.
to be in. So I
Hmm.
am leaning a little bit towards terrible and subjective, again, with some exceptions, but I'll let you respond to the lady first.
So the lady says, oh, I'm pretty sure there are well functioning co parenting families that clearly show it's possible.
Mhm.
And I'd agree with that. I just think it should be denoted that it's different when you've called the relationship to an end and you're in a co-parenting situation versus you're still in the relationship and there is some yearning or desire on both sides to still be there and it's terrible. So to me, those are two separate things. Whereas like, yeah, we've called things to an end. It was a terrible partner. I've moved on
Hmm.
versus you're a terrible partner in a current relationship.
Okay, I would like to know a little bit more about the difference that you see there
Mm-hmm.
because I think in my head, whether the relationship is still going on or not, um, there could still be that like, oh, I'm a terrible parent factor. But I will say, and I think I saw comments about this too, that just because a relationship ends, that doesn't mean that there were terrible partners involved in that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So you can still have a relationship that doesn't work with two
Mm-hmm.
decent people. Nobody's perfect. You can have a relationship that doesn't work between two decent people. And that doesn't necessarily mean that either one of them was a terrible partner and now they're going to be a terrible parent. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Oh, yeah, I agree. Especially once you've moved on and you're in the space of co-parenting
Hmm.
and you're just in a different season.
Yeah.
When with the initial tweet, I initially thought not of co-parenting. I thought of people who are actively in a relationship
Hmm.
and their partner is doing terrible things,
Okay.
yet they're like, I'm a great parent, versus the relationship is over. I'm single or remarried. You're
Hmm.
doing whatever you're doing, and we come together to parent the children.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you do you feel like someone who was a terrible partner in a relationship can go on after it? Someone was a terrible partner and a terrible parent while in the relationship. Do you think that afterwards they can automatically slip into, okay, well, I don't have the partnership anymore, so now I can be a good parent? Or do you feel like there's a lot of like rehab that still needs to take
Mm-hmm.
place to get them to a place of being a decent parent?
And just to clarify, you said they were a terrible parent while in the relationship as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Ooh, I do think that change is possible, but
Okay.
I think you would have to put in a lot of effort to make that happen. And
Mm.
I would also think about, okay, well, what is driving you to make this change when you were there, maybe in the home and in the relationship, you weren't showing up as the best parent, but
Mhm.
now all of a sudden you are. What changed for you?
Yeah.
Was it a big life event that happened that you had this light bulb of, oh, now I want to change? Or I don't know that it would just happen on its own. It will require, I think, a lot of thought, effort, um, and you do things out of habit. So if you're
Mhm.
not in the habit of showing up a certain way, I do think, what did they say? It takes 21 days to build a habit. So
That's what they say. I don't know if that's true anymore. I feel like
yeah.
that might have been true when we were growing up, but I'm sure somebody's done some research on that that's like, no.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So even with that,
Yeah.
it's going to take you 3 weeks minimum.
Mhm.
What about you?
I do think it's possible, but I think it takes time. Like you don't go from being a terrible parent to just being a good parent even within the 21 days.
I mean,
But
even people who
yeah.
feel like, okay, I'm not a perfect parent, but I want to show up as a better parent, the effort and energy that has to be put into that,
Mhm.
even just if you say, oh, I want to parent maybe differently than how I was parented,
Yes.
that it requires so much effort and energy on
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
And even the first step is hard. So the first step being the intention needs to change. Like whereas before maybe you were going through the parenting motions,
Mm-hmm.
you actually have to reflect on why that wasn't working and then build intentions around how to like move forward. So that's just step one. And then following through with that intention, not to say you have to get it right within the first year or whatever, because I think parents are always, if you're doing it right, in my opinion, you're
Mm-hmm.
always changing, like you're always improving, you're always reflecting. But yeah, getting the intention is hard, and then implementing what you now see as the new goal, I think is a lifetime's worth of work.
That, and I do wonder if you get to a place where you realize, hey, I haven't been the best parent, is that a result of your children telling you? Is it your ex partner telling you? Is it the grandparent calling out certain things? So I'm just like, okay, well, how do you get to a space of, I thought what I was doing was fine before, to, oh, I'm going to change it?
Hmm. Yeah. So I want to go into something that you said
Hmm.
initially. So you said, well, there are things that we all objectively know are terrible. So for you, what would you say are objectively terrible traits that someone might find in a partner that could transfer from partnership to parenting?
Abusive language.
Ah, okay. That's
Yeah.
a great one.
You know, I think if you're used to talking at your partner in a certain way, a certain tone, I think that can easily transfer to your child, not when they're 5 months old, but maybe when they're 5 years old,
Mm,
when you're able to have a conversation with them and you're reprimanding and disciplining them. I definitely could see that transferring over.
yeah. Abusive language, and then of course like even physical
Hmm.
abuse. I think is something that translates, but probably even worse so because a lot of times adults feel like children aren't. I don't want to say children are less than human, but they don't
Mm.
see the humanity of children as clearly as they might see the humanity of other adults, even if
Mhm.
they do, right? So they see kids as mini human as opposed to whole human.
Whole feelings. There's this
Yeah.
sense of, "Oh, well, they don't fully get it or understand,"
Yes.
and with research, we know that that is far from true.
And so I can just imagine that if you are using abusive language or if you are physically abusive to someone who is maybe your equal, quote unquote,
Mhm.
it'll probably be even worse on someone who you feel like, oh, well, you don't have a right to say anything to me, or you don't have a right to form an opinion on this that's different from mine. I can imagine it would be even worse.
Yeah, also, I think of gaslighting too. I think people can get comfortable with doing that with adults.
Mm,
And even more so with children, as you said, because they're not seen as fully adult or human. It's
hmm.
like, oh, well, they don't really fully know what's going on when they maybe are trying to communicate something that's important or of grave concern.
Yeah.
It's like, no, no, it's because you're young or you don't understand.
Yeah.
It can be easy to be very dismissive,
Hmm.
and
I
that
think
can transfer.
I think another thing that could transfer is like lack of reliability. So if someone isn't a reliable partner, I would never trust I would never trust them to be around like my kids, let alone like have children with them. I think
Mhm.
that is a very telltale sign that that this is something that could transfer into parenthood. And if you can't show up for the things that I need you to show up for me, and maybe even things that you need to show up for yourself,
Mhm.
then there's no way that you're going to be able to prioritize, recitals or homework or, just conversations with the child.
Yeah, raising.
Yeah, raising a child. So I think that's another thing. Any others that you could think about?
I don't know if this is a trait,
Hmm.
but I would envision if there are things that you don't like as much about your partner. With children, as they get older, they can embody some of those things or be like
Hmm.
their parent, oftentimes without trying. Obviously,
Yeah.
children are being molded and raised. I don't want to say brainwashed, but a lot of our mannerisms or how we carry
Influence.
ourselves, yeah, we're heavily influenced by our parents. And so if there are things that you don't like or are unsavory about your partner, and as your child grows and develops, they are embodying some of those things,
Yeah.
I would just think that you just have to be very thoughtful about how you're going about calling it out
Mm,
in a child. So with an adult, you maybe, I don't want to say don't have as much respect, maybe not as much thought for how they may interpret. If there is a certain level of respect that you don't have when you're criticizing them or calling certain things out, I could see that transferring to a child, especially if they're embodying those things that you maybe see are unsavory or you don't like in your partner.
hmm. Yeah. I feel like there are a million more like traits to to look out for. And if we think about them, we'll definitely call them out. But obviously, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave that in the comments.
Mhm.
And if you're just listening on Apple Podcasts, you can come to YouTube and leave it in the comments too. But yeah, there are just so many things that I think are objectively terrible traits. So this goes beyond, oh, we just don't really get along. Our personalities don't match. I don't know if you heard, this was years ago when
Mhm.
Neo and his wife were getting a divorce. I think the first time that they separated. And he
Oh,
was
the
like,
crystal, that one.
yes. And
Okay.
he was like, yeah, our demons just didn't match. But that's like, so this is beyond your demons not matching. Um, and just like objectively bad behaviors that aren't great. Okay, so since we talked about the comments that we disagreed with, or the comments that disagreed with the original tweeter. I wanted to read one where the person agreed. And there were, like
Okay.
I said, several of these, but this was like kind of the first one. So the most liked out of all of those comments. And
Okay.
so this person says, the way people think you mean that because the relationship didn't work out, that they must be a terrible parent too, is sending me. It's a character is in all caps. It's a character issue. If you lie, manipulate, abuse your partner, you will most likely do that to your own children. People with less power or less authority. Anyone that
Mm.
intentionally chooses to violate a union or the terms they said they'd honor at the best of their ability, married or not, I don't want my kids around or would never reproduce with. Those moral flaws remain regardless of who is on the other end, in my eyes. Whew,
Mm.
she said a lot.
Yeah, that was a lot.
Yeah, someone actually asked a question that I figured we could talk about a little bit.
Okay.
So this person says, not that I agree, but to play devil's advocate, which can we just agree that the devil does not need an advocate? If you want to present another way of looking at things, do that. But no need to play devil's advocate. Anyway, so this person says, isn't the love or patience you have for your child different from the one that you have for your partner? Sorry.
Mm.
And so the original tweeter said, if you're not a patient person to begin with, you won't parent patiently. While the love you feel for your children may be different, people can't shed their character because a child comes into their life.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's this general assumption that we all will conduct ourselves differently with children, have
Mm-hmm.
more patience, more kindness, more this, more that. But I don't know that that's always true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do think the love is different, but of course, if you're not a patient person and you don't set the intention to be patient and then you don't follow up the intention with actions, then you're absolutely still going to be an impatient parent. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of this goes into maybe people just need to do a lot of reflection
Hmm.
before they have children. Like,
Yeah. But I understand what the comment is saying because
mm-hmm,
children will test your patience. I don't want to say more than adults, but just in a
mm-hmm,
different way, especially you having your first child.
mm-hmm.
And if you haven't been in a situation where you've had hands-on raising and rearing of other people's children,
Yeah,
I think you get used to interacting with adults. And so
yes.
patience is one of those things where you need to flex it in a different way.
Also, just because you're not showing patience in one relationship, that doesn't necessarily mean you're an impatient person. And I say that because I can think of people who, like, my patience has just run out for. Like, it's just
Mm.
completely gone. I am a patient person. I have been a patient person with them, but it's just been so long of the same thing that I think my patience has run out. Whereas, maybe with a child, my patience can't run out here, like, because this human is dependent on me for however many years of their life. So the patience can't run out. So maybe there are some who give more effort and set more intentions towards the children in their life than the adults, because the adults can
Mm.
make those decisions. The adults aren't their children.
Yeah.
So yeah, so they might have more grace for the kid. Hopefully that's everybody. Hopefully everybody has more grace and more patience with the kids because they are kids. They're still developing. And not to say adults aren't developing, but they've had their time. They've had
Yeah.
a lot of time to do a lot of things that the children have not even experienced. So
So I wanted to ask you, this is a
mhm,
question I just thought about. It's somewhat related. You mentioned that basically we can show up differently
yeah.
depending on the relationship. Do you think that that applies in terms of parenting, where
Mm.
maybe a person wasn't the best parent for child one, but then they enter into a relationship again, they have another child, and they show up in parenthood better or differently?
I have actually seen it happen.
Mm.
So I knew this person who had their first child at, I think, 20.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, this is what the person said about themselves. So they were just like immature. Everything was so urgent to them that a
Mm.
child wasting time to do anything was just like, you need to hurry up. And they were very impatient. They would yell, they would do this, whatever. So fast forward, I think I met this person when they were, I want to say 36, 37. At this time, they'd gotten married and had two additional kids with their spouse.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was literally saying to me, I feel like I'm doing parenting the right way now. And she
Mm.
would think about how she was with her first child. And according to her, would literally like cringe because she's like, I really didn't have the resources to even be patient. Like the difference between this child throwing a tantrum right now and me having to get to work as a single parent, and this is not to recall single parents because there are some who are doing the
Mm-hmm.
doggone thing, okay? Several actually, not just some. But yeah, she was like, I just didn't have the resources. And so everything was like the house is on fire.
Mm.
Now, like I am more of a reflective person. I take my time. I've had the years to understand children more and
Mm-hmm.
myself more. And so I can be a better parent to these younger ones. So I've
Yeah.
seen that transformation, but keep in mind from 20 to 36, 37, like that's a lot of years,
Yeah.
to develop as a person. That's probably a lot of mistakes that were made initially that aren't being made now, thankfully. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think we mentioned this on a previous episode where when it comes to siblings, how we can just experience our parents so different. It's like,
Hmm.
yeah, you have the same parents, or you think you do,
Hmm.
but especially if there's been a significant amount of time, but even if it's only been a year, like if you have one, a year goes by, you have another one, that second will experience parenthood or parenting different because now there's two. And
Yeah.
even for the firstborn, when you add another one,
Yeah.
their experience will shift as well because now they have a sibling. So people can grow up having just very different experiences and views of what the parenting was or wasn't,
Hmm.
even though you may be close siblings.
Absolutely. So, there were some people who shared like personal experiences where
Mm.
one person says, I've definitely witnessed a terrible partnership, good parent dynamic before. It's unusual and not ideal, but not impossible unless you're attaching very specific behaviors or actions to terrible that aren't expressed here. And then someone else said, some people in the replies just don't get it. Part of good parenting is demonstrating how to treat others. If you're treating your other half like garbage, what kind of example are you setting for the kids? Because they see everything when you try to hide, even when you try to hide. And
Yeah,
then
the example that you're being.
yes, exactly. And I get that because I'm big on, I'm not taking advice from you if you're not leading by example. Like if you're telling me to, you know, I don't know, warm the car up 10 minutes before I get out the driveway. And every time I ride with you,
You want to
before the
rush.
car, right, before the car is barely on, you're out the drive. Like, come on. I'm more likely to pick up on how your behavior is.
Hmm.
And then the last person says, to be honest, my dad, dang, people putting all their business out here. Hold on. To be honest, my dad was a cheater. So, really not a great husband, but he always had been the best dad. Once they got a divorce, my parents stayed good friends slash co parents. I agree with you for violent partners. Okay, so this person agrees for violent partners because even if they don't hit the kid directly, it still affects the kid.
Yeah. I would
So,
even say while in the marriage,
oh
so
yeah.
maybe not the dad's specific behavior of cheating didn't
Hmm.
impact the child directly, but maybe how the mom felt during that season.
Mm,
I do think some people are better at compartmentalizing their emotions and than others, but you can't just make that assumption of, oh, well, you'll be fine in motherhood, even though I'm cheating on you right now. Some
yeah.
people may or may not be.
So depending on like who the child is, the father's cheating could still be an example of bad parenting just because you are maybe implying, oh, well, this is what to expect from
Acceptable.
a partner. Yeah, this is what to
Hmm.
expect. This is acceptable behavior. And, daughter or son, those things have the possibility of affecting them in a lot of different
Oh,
ways.
yeah. Imagine them finding out they think their parents are in love or they at least like each other. It reminds me of Love and Basketball when he realized that the dad had the
Yeah.
side baby. It could be
Mhm.
traumatizing for the child as well. You've shaken up their reality.
Exactly. Exactly. So with these like real life examples, I was going to ask you, have you seen examples of people being horrible partners but good parents? And have you seen like horrible partners, horrible parents?
Oh, I've seen it both.
Have you really?
Yeah, I've seen it both. Yeah, and the one where they're a terrible partner
Hmm.
and a terrible parent, I only say that only because the behavior while in the relationship.
Okay.
So the time after when you're co-parenting, you're free, so to speak. But while you're in the relationship, I've seen that where they think that, oh, I'm showing up as this great person for my kids day to day, but the behavior and what I'm putting the mom through or the dad through, but in this instance, it was the mom.
Hmm.
It's like, oh, well, they'll be fine. It's like, no,
Hmm.
it's like we all like to think we can hide or have a mask in
Yeah.
front of our children. And I don't know that we're as good as we think that we are. Children are so smart. They pick up on your energy when things are different. And so, yeah, it's like you have this idea that your behavior can be super reckless and crazy,
Hmm.
and that mom is going to have or dad is going to have this mask when they're in front of the kids.
Okay.
And it goes a step further because I think the behavior probably tends to lead to arguing and fighting. I mean, you'd have to be really buttoned up, so to speak, of
Mhm.
hiding what's going on
Yeah.
from your kids. And they're probably listening, especially once they're a certain age, they're eavesdropping, hearing all the business.
Even the buttoned up crew, that type of stuff can have an impact. Like you'll hear people say, "Oh, well, I I never heard, when I experienced my parents being hurt by something, I never heard them speak out about it. So I figured
Mhm.
that's the way it should be." Or, nobody in my household ever had arguments. And so you're expecting that things are going to go great once you're in a relationship. And then you're running into, oh, wait, we don't always see eye to eye. How does healthy arguing happen?
Mhm.
So I think, everything impacts kids. Even if you're the absolute best parent, like there's always going to be something. And so you just have to, as a non-parent, this is what I think. You just have to do your best and adjust according to what that child's needs are. Whether
Mhm.
infant, toddler, adolescent, adult, you have to adjust to what that child's needs are. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and I wanted to add something else too.
uh-huh.
Even if you've ended the relationship and you've moved on to the space of co-parenting,
Mhm.
I think the behavior of the person who's not the custodial parent also can, at least in terms of how you're interacting and dealing with them
Mm.
going forward, can impact the children maybe more than the parent who's away for the week. I'm thinking
Interesting.
of just, okay, the children are with one parent all week. Maybe you have weekend duty or you're alternating. But even when you're in a space of co parenting, I think ideally, hopefully, the parent who's doing most of the raising and rearing day to day
Mhm.
is in a good situation mentally, emotionally, because they're with the child most of the time. So if you're still wilding out even during that season and it's a lot of drama, it can, I don't know if you can say that you're showing up as like a good parent,
Mm.
because the parent is the custodial parent. I think, I don't want to say it's more important. It's just their impact is greater because they have more time
Fine.
with the child
I
day
can,
to day, at least.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I've seen both. Okay, one I've heard of. The other one I have a closer seat to,
Mm,
where it's like, someone who I am cool with this person,
mm-hmm,
but when I look at the relationships that this person has had and
mm,
how they approached them, and then I look at the relationship this person has with their children and how they've approached that, it's hard to see. Like, if this were the only case that we studied, we would absolutely say, okay, horrible partner, horrible parent,
mm-hmm,
because I can clearly point to, okay, so you were so quick to abandon as a partner and also feel like you could come back whenever you felt like it. And
mm-hmm.
now you've abandoned as a parent,
Yeah,
and nobody's really, holding you as accountable as you need to be held accountable.
yeah,
So I've absolutely seen it. Like, there, in this case, I think there's no reason why the relationship parents with this parent and their children, why it needs to be the way it needs to be, other than, as a parent, you've decided, oh, I don't want to put up with that anymore, and you're treating it like you would a divorce, which you
yeah,
went through a couple of times. So,
yeah.
like, so I've clearly seen that. But then I've seen another situation, or I've heard of another situation where, and I was told this by the child in the relationship, like, that the parents didn't necessarily get along. They weren't able to make the marriage work. The mother was extremely hurt by the fact that they weren't able to make it work, but the father was absolutely present, made sure they showed up, made sure they planned activities, made sure like they were a parent,
Mm-hmm,
went through all that they needed to go through to make sure that they had regular time with the child, you
mm-hmm.
know, uh, but yeah, so in that case, I do think it was a situation where, okay, I had to leave this other parent. I had to, like,
Mhm.
get out of the relationship with my co-parent, but that doesn't alleviate me the responsibilities of a parent. Wait, did I say?
Said,
It sounds like I said parent both sides, but I have to get out of the situation with my partner, but that
mhm.
doesn't mean that I'm not a parent. There we go. I just felt like I said parent too many times.
Mm.
But yeah, so I've definitely seen both. All right, so we're going to get into our last segment for the episode, and that is girlfriend check in. It's where we ask each other a question, either from an internet quiz, a conversation starter game, wherever, and check in with the other person. So today's question is, I think, very suitable for the conversation we've just had. But what is a relationship deal breaker for you?
A relationship deal breaker for me, one, just one,
No, girl,
is
give us the list. No, I'm just kidding.
no. One would be if they're not flexible, if
Ooh,
they're not willing to compromise or meet in the middle, if they just feel like everything has to go their way. And I'm talking long-term partnerships, marriage. I don't know. It would just seem to be very difficult to be married to someone who is not flexible,
yeah.
willing to meet in the middle, even willing. I'd understand if at first you're like, no, I'm not going to be able to do it, but at least come back, give it some thought, some time.
Yeah.
That would be a hard deal breaker for me because there are going to be so many things we're not going to see eye to eye on, and everything cannot go your way.
Mm,
Everything can go my way, but
absolutely.
most of the time, let's be meeting in the middle. So that would be a hard deal breaker for me because it would affect everything. What we're going to eat for dinner versus what house are we buying? Like it's big and little. So.
And either you'd have to bend or y'all just won't do anything at all, like, so are we going to Mexico or Canada for this vacation? You want to go to Mexico, I want to go to Canada. You're like, we have to go to Mexico. Okay, we just gonna stay home then. Like we're not going anywhere. And that's a
Listen.
really small example. But I will say I think that's also a very hard thing, like being flexible, because it's just you for however long and you don't have to consider like someone else's opinion. So it's a very interesting thing to have to learn during relationships. I think flexibility.
And at the same time, it's like, well, if you say you want to be in a relationship, like that's what
It's something you have to learn.
relationships are.
Yes.
Otherwise, you would just be single by yourself and you don't even have to worry about that.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's always going to be one person bending. And
Yep.
yeah, eventually they're going to break and be over it. So,
I think for me, a huge relationship deal breaker is someone who doesn't show remorse for negative actions and doesn't apologize for them. So, like, if you've done something, even if you didn't intend to do it or whatever, but you've done
mhm,
something, I say, hey, this hurt me. I would like that to never happen again. Like,
mhm.
don't be like, well, that shouldn't have hurt you. Okay, it
Okay,
did.
then.
Right, it did. And if you do it again, it's going to hurt me again. So, where do we go from here? So, yeah, I think it's extremely important for me that someone, especially if we're talking a lifetime together, I need you to be able to understand when you were wrong, understand, when you've done something that the other person does not like, and be humble enough to say, hey, I realize that I hurt you. I care enough about you to apologize for this and figure out how we can make amends to move forward. So that's important to me in friendships, family relationships, and especially romantic relationships. So
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
that would
that's another must. I don't know.
be
It would be very difficult to be married for a lifetime and you don't want to apologize.
ever.
You're going to be wrong.
Yes. And it's I think sometimes people are like, oh, well, yeah, I know I'm not perfect. I know I can be wrong. Okay, well, do you? And if you know that you're wrong, what's the next step? Like
Mhm.
to make amends with the offended party. But anyway, all right. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of the Girlfriends and Goals podcast. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at Girlfriends and Goals podcast. If you are watching this on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and comment your thoughts on this topic. And if you're watching on Apple Podcasts, please don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and write a review. Until next time, bye.
Bye.